The Lord of the Rings is a name that almost everyone knows, and most understand its significance in modern fantasy literature. The Lord of the Rings has established many standards and serves as a benchmark for countless fantasy works in subsequent generations. The universe of the Lord of the Rings is not limited to The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books, but extends through many related works, most of which were edited by Christopher Tolkien. In this video, let's briefly review some key points in the history of the world of the Lord of the Rings, or Arda, in the most basic and concise way. The Silmarillion is the collection of stories about the universe of the Lord of the Rings, edited and revised by Christopher Tolkien from his father's manuscripts. Because we are just touching on a few basic points, many important events will not be discussed in detail. Perhaps they will be the subject of other videos. But now, let's get started. The mythology about Arda as the earth begins with Anil-Indale, the music of the Ainur, a tale about Ilúvatar, the supreme god, and the Ainur as the holy ones. The Ainur were divine beings created from Ilúvatar's thought. They sang for him, first individually, then in small groups, and finally all together to create a great theme. Among the Ainur, the strongest was Melkor, who began to sow discord by introducing his own melodies, disrupting the harmony of the great theme. This happened in the first music, and Ilúvatar responded by initiating the second music, entrusting Manwë, Melkor's brother, to lead it. However, Melkor once again opposed the second music, leading some Ainur and creating chaotic melodies to disrupt the harmony. Once more, Ilúvatar initiated the third music, so profound that even the Ainur could not fully comprehend it. Then Ilúvatar commanded the Ainur to stop the music and revealed to them a vision of a world shaped by their melodies. Many Ainur were captivated by this vision, and the most powerful among them wished to bring it into existence. Ilúvatar granted their desire and created Ea as the universe. The most powerful Ainur entered Ea, henceforth known as the Valar, who shaped the cosmos and the world. The leader of the Valar was Manwë, assisted by Ulmo and Ole, and together they forged the world. However, Melkor also entered Ea, waiting for the world to take form before revealing his ambition to claim Arda for himself. Arda was only a small part of Ea, and Manwë summoned many Ainur to aid him in driving Melkor away. Melkor observed Arda being shaped by the Valar and their Maiar as lesser Ainur, and he envied their work. Thus, he returned to Arda, attacked the Valar, and seduced many Maiar to serve him. Eventually, Tulkas, a mighty and valiant Valar, learned of the war in Ea and came to Manwë's aid. Once again, Melkor fled, as he was not yet strong enough to oppose the Valar. Arda was finally formed, and the Valar and Maiar brought life to the world with countless creatures and plants. To illuminate the world, they created two lamps, Iluin in the north and Ormul in the south. In the central land, they created a vast lake, and in its center, an island named Almaran, where the Valar rested and admired the light of the two lamps. However, while the Valar rested, Melkor returned to Arda. Accompanied by many Ainur who had once sung with him, he traveled to the far north of Arda. There, Melkor and his followers built a mighty fortress called Utumno. When he deemed his forces strong enough, Melkor attacked and destroyed the two lamps, undoing much of the Valar's work. The Valar, caught off guard and disheartened, quickly counterattacked, but failed to capture Melkor, who had retreated to Utumno. There, he gathered his minions, the most notable among them being Sauron, Gothmog, lord of the Balrogs, Droglin, the progenitor of werewolves, Furingwethel, and many other creatures. Among his early followers, some did not fully submit to Melkor. Ungoliant was one such being, and instead of returning to Utumno, the monstrous spider fled to the west of Arda. Meanwhile, in the western lands of Arda, the Valar created the continent of Aman, the Blessed Realm, and resided there. They raised a mountain range called the Pelori and fortified Valinor, the land of the Valar against Melkor. The Valar hesitated to wage another war against Melkor, fearing it would devastate the land Ilúvatar had chosen for his children. In Valinor, the Valar created new sources of light. 2 trees, Telperion, the Silver Tree, and Laurelin, the Golden Tree. The light of the 2 trees illuminated much of Aman. However, beyond Valinor, in the dark lands south of the Pelori Mountains, Ungoliant resided, spinning her webs. Her domain was a place where no one dared to tread. The patience of the Valar bore fruit when they discovered the Quendi as elves, the firstborn of Ilúvatar, who had awakened and sung under the starlit skies in Cuiviénen, in the east of Middle-earth. However, the Valar were too late. Melkor had found them first, and had already instilled terror among the elves. Unable to stand idly by as Ilúvatar's children suffered in fear, the Valar decided to attack and drive out Melkor. The war for the fate of the elves began, a brutal conflict that reshaped the world. Ultimately, Melkor was defeated, and Utumno was completely destroyed, leaving only the western outpost of Angband. Melkor was taken to Valinor, judged and imprisoned in the halls of Mandos, a place even the mighty Melkor could not escape. For many ages, Melkor remained captive, wasting away in prison, until he was eventually pardoned by the mercy of the Valar. By then, many elves had migrated to Valinor, flourishing and building a civilization that even Melkor found astonishing. Yet, alongside this marvel, his envy and hatred festered. Melkor vowed to take revenge on the elves for his years of captivity. He sought to win their trust, but among the 3 great elven houses in Aemon, only the Noldor were swayed by his deceitful words. His lies sowed discord between the great princes of the Noldor, Fëanor and Fingolfin. The Valar, upon discovering this, had not yet intervened when Melkor once again vanished from their sight. He fled to the dark lands of Avathar, where he encountered Ungoliant and made a pact for her aid. Together, they secretly returned to Valinor, and during a grand festival when Manwë hosted a feast, and all defenses were relaxed, struck at the 2 trees on Izellohar. There, Melkor used a black spear to stab into the heart of each tree, wounding them deeply, causing their sap to spill like blood onto the ground. Ungoliant then consumed the sap, draining the trees entirely, and her deadly poison withered their roots, branches, and leaves, killing them completely. Darkness engulfed Valinor, but that was not Melkor's only crime. He was the one who slew Finwë, king of the Noldor, and stole the 3 Silmarils, gems created by his son, Fëanor, from the light of the 2 trees, the only remaining vessels of that sacred radiance. When Fëanor learned of his father's death and the loss of the Silmarils, he was overcome with grief and hatred. He cursed Melkor, calling him Morgoth, and urged the Noldor to return to Middle-earth to reclaim the Silmaril. He and his 7 sons took a terrible oath, vowing to seek, hunt, and destroy any who held a Silmaril. Even the Valar could not dissuade Fëanor, and most of the Noldor followed him, though some were reluctant to leave Aman. As for Morgoth and Ungoliant, after destroying the 2 trees and stealing the Silmarils, they fled back to Middle-earth. But the 2 soon quarreled over the jewel. Morgoth wished to keep them for himself, while Ungoliant desired them to consume the last remnants of the tree's light. Yet, Ungoliant had grown vast, and Morgoth had lost much of his strength. She rose up, enshrouding him in darkness, ensnaring him in webs of sticky silk to strangle him. Then Morgoth let out a dreadful scream, echoing through the mountain. That land was thereafter called Lambeth, for his cry lingered there eternally, so that any loud shout would awaken it, filling the desolate land with howls of agony. His scream was the greatest and most terrible ever heard in the north, shaking mountains, quaking the earth, and rending stones asunder. Even in forgotten places, his cry was heard. Deep beneath the ruined halls of Angband, in chambers the Valar had left untouched in their assault, lay hidden Balrogs, waiting for their master's return. They swiftly emerged, racing through Hithlum like a storm of fire toward Lam. With whips of flame they tore through Ungoliant's web, forcing her to flee southward into Beleriand, where she dwelled beneath the arid Gorgoroth. The mountains of Terran, a dark valley later named Nandortheb, the Valley of Dreadful Death. There, she spawned horrors of her own, monstrous spider-like creatures that had lived there since Angband's construction. She mated with them and devoured them, and later she vanished into the forgotten south of the world. Her fate was unknown, but some claimed that, in the end, driven by insatiable hunger, she devoured herself. Morgoth returned to Angband and rebuilt his fortress in Middle-earth. He waged war against the elves who had remained there instead of journeying to Aman. When the Noldor arrived, war raged for generations between Morgoth and the Noldor, along with their ally. Many fierce and bloody battles were fought, countless tragedies unfolded, and in the end, Morgoth triumphed over all who opposed him. He came close to ultimate victory, yet in his arrogance, he disregarded the few remaining elves and men who had survived the countless wars. From both their lineages arose Arundel, a mariner of great renown, who bore the blood of both elves and men. With the power of a Silmaril reclaimed by Beren and Luthien from Morgoth's Iron Crown, he sailed to Valinor, pleading with the Valar to have mercy on Middle-earth. At last, the sins of the Noldor were forgiven, and the Valar resolved to intervene on behalf of the Sinda, the Grey Elves, who had never journeyed to Aman and the race of men. The Valar gathered a host greater than any seen since the world's creation, unmatched until the Dagor Dagoreth, the final battle. The war between the hosts of the West and the forces of the North was called the Great Battle, the War of Wrath. Morgoth unleashed all the might of Angband, and the North was engulfed in smoke and fire. But it availed him nothing. The Balrogs were nearly wiped out, save for a few who fled into the deepest caverns of the world. Countless legions of orcs perished in the Inferno, swept away like dry leaves in a scorching wind. Only a few remained to plague the world in the ages to come. Among men, few of the three houses of the Edain fought for the Valar, while many others had marched alongside Morgoth, and the elves never forgot this betrayal. Seeing his forces shattered and his power waning, Morgoth trembled in fear and dared not show himself. But he unleashed a final, desperate assault he had long prepared. From the depths of Angband, dragons with wings never before seen took to the skies. Their sudden and devastating onslaught drove back the Valar's army as they roared through the storm of fire and thunder. But then came Arundel, shining with white flame, leading a host of great birds led by Thorondor, king of Eagle. A battle raged in the skies for a day and a night. Before dawn, Arundel slew Ancalagon the Black, the mightiest of dragons, whose falling corpse crushed the peaks of Thangorodrim. When the sun rose, the army of the Valar prevailed, and most of the dragons were destroyed. Morgoth's fortresses were laid bare, and the power of the Valar struck deep into the earth. Morgoth was driven to despair, fleeing to the lowest depths of Angband, pleading for mercy and surrender. But he was cast down, his feet hewn from under him, and his iron crown was beaten into a collar, forcing his head to bow to his knee. Once again, he was bound with the chain Angainor, as he had been before. Thus, the dominion of Angband was ended, and the Dark Realm was utterly destroyed. From the deepest dungeons, countless slaves emerged into a world forever changed. So great was the wrath of the opposing forces that the north of Middle-earth was shattered and almost completely destroyed. Morgoth himself was cast beyond the walls of the world, through the door of night, into the timeless void. There the Valar stood watch, and Arundel guarded the borders of the sky. Yet the lies and malice of Morgoth Bogler, the black foe of the world, had taken root in the hearts of elves and men like seeds that would never die. They would sprout anew, bearing the bitter fruit of darkness in ages to come. And in the end, when the time is ripe, he shall break free from his bonds once more, bringing forth the last battle. To the men who aided in Morgoth's downfall, the Valar granted a great reward, though it would later sow the seeds of sorrow. They gave them long lifespans, though not the immortality of the elves. For the fate of men was not tied to Arda, and after death, their souls were free to depart to a place unknown even to the Valar. This was the gift of Iluvatar, and none could take it from them. They were granted the island of Elena, off the coast of Middle-earth, as their new home, which they later named Numenor. These men became the Dúnedain, the kings of men, the high men of the West, a lineage greater than any other among Middle-earth's mortals. For a long time, the Númenóreans flourished, forgetting the troubles of Middle-earth. But in time they changed, growing envious of the elves' immortality. In Middle-earth, Morgoth's most loyal servant, Sauron, and other dark creatures that escaped during the War of Wrath, established another dark kingdom in the land of Mordor. Believing that the Valar would no longer concern themselves with this land, Sauron attacked the elves to claim dominion over Middle-earth. However, the Dúnedain returned to aid the elves and defeated. Sauron then set his sights on Númenor and saw the growing darkness in their hearts. He devised a scheme to corrupt the Númenóreans and lead them down a path of destruction. As a result, the last king of Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn, became so arrogant that he assembled the great armada to invade Aman. Upon learning of this, the Valar relinquished their authority and pleaded with Ilúvatar, who granted them the power to alter the world forever. Númenor was submerged beneath the ocean, the world was bent, and Aman was forever removed from the sight of Middle-earth. Although the kingdom of Númenor was destroyed, its descendants, the men of the West who remained uncorrupted, survived, and it would be their lineage that would one day witness the downfall of Sauron. However, the Valar would not abandon Arda. When Sauron rose again in the Third Age, they sent their emissaries to aid the peoples of Middle-earth against the enemy. These were the Istari, and they were the Valar's final direct intervention in the fate of the children of Ilúvatar. Among the Istari, only one would fulfill his mission. He vanquished the last Balrog and led the free peoples of Middle-earth in the war to overthrow Sauron. Now I will talk about a brief overview of the elves and the legend of the Silmaril. The first race to awaken and speak in Middle-earth was the Quendi, or the elves, and they were called the firstborn of Ilúvatar, whereas men were the second-born and dwarves were the adopted children. The fate of the elves was bound to Arda until the end of days, and their spirits could never leave Ea. Thus, even if their bodies were destroyed, through the blessing of Ilúvatar and the Valar, they could be reborn in new form. The elves were divided into three main clans: the Minyar, the Tatyar, and the Nilliar. In the first great division of the elves, they were further split into two major groups: the Eldar and the Avari. The Eldar were those who chose to migrate to Aman, while the Avari were those who chose to remain in Middle-earth. Among the Eldar, there were three major divisions. All the Minyar became the Vanyar, half of the Tatyar became the Noldor, and 2/3 of the Nilliar became the Teleri. The remaining Tatyar and Nilliar became the Avari. Among the Teleri who chose to journey to Aman, some never completed the migration and remained in Middle-earth. These Teleri later became known as the Sindar. The Minyar were the smallest in number, but the wisest among the elves. They loved forests and open plains, and most had radiant golden hair. The Tatyar were master craftsmen, inventors, and great lore masters. They favored hills and mountains and were skilled smiths and miners. The Nilliar were talented singers who loved the water above all else. When the Vala Orome discovered that the elves had awakened in Cuiviénen, he realized that they were threatened by a dark force, which he suspected to be Melkor's minions or Melkor himself. At Orome's request, the Valar convened a council and decided to wage war against Melkor and bring the elves to Aman. After the war, Orome returned with the Valar's summons, but the elves, still fearful, refused to leave their homeland. To convince them, Orome selected 3 ambassadors from the elven leaders to visit Aman and see the beauty of the Valar's land for themselves. These 3 were Ingwe of the Minyar, Finwë of the Tatyar, and Elwë of the Nilliar. Later, only Ingwe would find eternal peace in Aman. Ingwe persuaded all of the Minyar to follow him to Aman, and they were the first to depart, beginning the great journey. Finwë convinced half of the Tatyar to follow him, continuing after the Minyar. Elwë with the help of his brother Olwe, convinced more than half of the Nelir to come along. These were the most hesitant to leave their homeland and were later called the Teleri, the latecomer. The three groups of elves who chose to leave Middle-earth and undertake the great journey were later known as the Eldar, the Children of the Stars, though originally Oromi had used this name for all elves. Those who chose to remain in Cuivanen became known as the Avari, the Unwilling, because they rejected the summons of the Valar. The Teleri elves continued to divide during their journey. The first division occurred when Lenwë, one of their leaders, decided to turn back upon reaching the Anduin River, leading away a third of the Teleri. These elves later became known as the Nandor. The next division happened in Beleriand, in the northern part of Middle-earth, when Elwë was enchanted by the song and beauty of a Maya named Melian in the forest of Nan Elmoth, abandoning his people. The others searched for Elwë in vain, and Olwe had to take up the mantle of leadership. Eventually, the Teleri continued their journey without those who stayed behind to look for Elwë. These elves, left behind when the Teleri departed from Middle-earth, called themselves the Eglath, the Forsaken. Additionally, another group of Teleri remained in Middle-earth, led by Círdan, who stayed by the shores of Middle-earth due to his friendship with the Maya Osse. These elves later referred to themselves as the Falathrain, the people of the shore. By the time the Teleri reached Aman, only about half of those who had originally set out remained, and they were led by Olwe, who became their king. However, unlike the Vanyar and Ulda who had settled in Aman, the Teleri initially lived for a long time on Tol Eressëa, a large island off the coast of Aman, until the Maya Osse was sent to teach them the art of shipbuilding. In Aman, Ingwe and Finwë together built the city of Tirion on the hill of Tuna in Calasaria, the only valley within the Pelori Mountains. Over time, however, Ingwe and the other Vanyar left Tirion and settled across various places in Valinor. Meanwhile, Olwe and the Teleri, upon reaching Aman, chose to live along the coastline. With assistance from the people of Ingwe, they constructed the city of Alqualondë, the Swan Haven. For centuries, the Eldar flourished in Aman, increasing in number and gaining vast knowledge from the Valar and Maya. Now, let us speak of Finwë and the Noldor, for indeed, much of the great events of the Elder Days revolved around the Noldor and Finwë's descendants. Finwë had two wives, an unprecedented event among the Eldar. His first wife, Míriel, passed away not long after giving birth to their son, Fëanor. Though Finwë mourned her deeply, he wished to have more children, and he later married Indis, the sister of Ingwe. She bore him 3 daughters, Findis, Faniel, and Irime, as well as 2 sons, Nolofinwë and Arafinwë. Nolofinwë later became known as Fingolfin, the greatest king of the Noldor in Middle-earth, while Arafinwë became known as Finarfin. As for Fëanor, he was noble and gifted, but he found no joy in his father's second marriage and bore little affection for his half-brothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin. He spent much of his time with his own family. In his youth, Fëanor married Nerdanel, the daughter of Matan, one of the most skilled smiths of the Noldor, who had been personally taught by the Valar Olli. Fëanor devoted himself to his wife and their 7 sons while honing his craftsmanship. In time, Fëanor became the greatest artisan of the Eldar. His most magnificent creation was the 3 Silmarils, which held within them the eternal light of the 2 trees. This was undoubtedly his greatest achievement, but not his only one. Fëanor also improved the Tengwar script used by the Eldar, crafted the seeing stones known as the Palantiri, and created many other works of wonder. However, Fëanor was also fiery-tempered and lacked wisdom, making him susceptible to Melkor's lies. He came to believe that his brother Fingolfin sought to usurp his place. These harmful thoughts led Fëanor to draw his sword against Fingolfin within their father's halls, in front of many witnesses. For this, the Valar decreed that Fëanor was to be exiled to the northern lands of Valinor. But King Finwë and many of the Noldor chose to follow him. They established the city of Formenos. Years later, during a grand feast of the Valar, Fëanor was permitted to return to Valmar to reconcile with his brother, but Finwë chose not to attend. This led to a tragic fate, for during this time Melkor attacked. He destroyed the two trees and stole the Silmarils. None could stand against him, and many perished at Formenos, including King Finwë. Upon hearing of this disaster, Fëanor defied the Valar's decree and returned to Tirion. There, he gathered the Noldor and persuaded them to follow him in pursuit of vengeance against Melkor. Yet, not all the Noldor supported him. Many preferred Fingolfin as their leader over Fëanor. Initially, the Valar did not interfere with the Noldor's decision, as they did not wish to impose their will upon the Elder. However, Fëanor and his sons swore a terrible oath, vowing to reclaim the Silmarils at any cost, even against the will of the Valar. Because of this, the Valar cast him out of Aman forever. Fëanor then led the majority of the Noldor, including his two half-brothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin, northward to the city of Alqualondë, hoping that the Teleri would aid them. However, Olwe refused to leave Aman, for his people lived in peace under the protection and guidance of the Valar, and they would not be swayed by Melkor's deceit. Thus, Fëanor sought to steal the swan ships of the Teleri. He was caught in the act, and in the ensuing confrontation, Fëanor drew his blade against the Teleri at the harbor. When Fingon, the son of Fingolfin, arrived, he mistakenly believed that the Teleri had attacked first. Thus, he led his warriors to defend Fëanor, and a bloody battle broke out. In the end, the Teleri were overpowered, and most of their mariners at Alqualondë were slaughtered. This tragic event became known as the Kinslaying, the first great crime of the Noldor. And for this crime, the Valar placed a curse upon the Noldor, and doom upon Fëanor and his house. This became known as the Prophecy of the North, or the Doom of the Noldor. Much of it was spoken in dark words, which the Noldor did not fully understand until calamity befell them. Countless tears shall be shed, and the Valar will shut the gates of Valinor and bar you from return, so that even the echoes of your lamentations will not pass beyond the mountain. The wrath of the Valar shall follow the house of Fëanor from west to east, and shall fall upon all who follow them. Their oath shall drive them and betray them, and they shall lose the treasures they swore to pursue. All things that begin well shall end in tragedy, and as they have betrayed their kin, so shall fear of betrayal haunt them in turn. They shall be ever the dispossessed. You have unjustly spilled the blood of your kin, and stained the land of Aman. For blood debt must be paid with blood, and beyond Aman you shall live under the shadow of death. Though Ilúvatar has granted you immortality within Ea, and no sickness shall bring you down, yet death shall find you, by weapons, by torment, and by grief. And your wandering spirits shall come to Mandos, to await long in yearning for their lost bodies, and none shall pity you, even should your victims plead for you. And those who remain in Middle-earth, and do not come to Mandos, shall be worn down by the burden of the world, and shall fade into shadows of regret before the coming of the younger race. Upon hearing this doom, Finarfin grew fearful and anxious for the fate of the Noldor. Thus, he and many others turned back to Aman, where they received the pardon of the Valar. He became king of the Noldor, who remained in Valinor. As for Fëanor and his followers, they seized many ships from the Teleri, but during their voyage across the sea, many of them were destroyed by the Maya Uinen, Lady of the Seas, who was wrathful over the crimes of the Noldor. Yet even these ships could not carry all the Noldor, and the majority were left behind on the shores of Aman with Fingolfin. With no other choice, Fingolfin led his people northward to the treacherous ice plains of Helcaraxë, a wasteland none had crossed before save the Valar. Braving the perilous journey, they endured immense suffering and countless perished. But at last, the Noldor reached Middle-earth. Upon their arrival, Morgoth, the Dark Lord of Angband, sent forth his armies to strike at them immediately. This battle was called Dagonu Giliath, the battle under stars, for the sun and moon had not yet been created. The Noldor emerged victorious, utterly destroying the majority of Morgoth's orc legions. However, Fëanor, overconfident in his power, pursued the fleeing orcs far beyond his main host, accompanied only by a small guard. Seeing this, the orcs turned back to attack him, and Balrogs emerged from Angband to reinforce them. Near Dor Daedaloth, Morgoth's domain, Fëanor and his guard were surrounded. One by one, his warriors fell, until only Fëanor himself remained. Yet he fought on, undaunted despite his grievous wounds. At last he was struck down by Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, and would have been slain had his sons not arrived to rescue him. They bore him away toward Mithrim, but as they approached Aethel Sirion, Fëanor bade them halt. His wounds were beyond healing, and he knew his death was imminent. Gazing one last time from the slopes of Erdwethrin, he saw the distant peaks of Thangorodrim, the tallest towers of Middle-earth, and in his final moments he realized that no strength of the Noldor could ever overthrow them. Yet with his dying breath, he cursed the name of Morgoth thrice, and commanded his sons to uphold their oath of vengeance. Then he perished. But he was neither buried nor given a tomb, for the fire of his spirit consumed his body, reducing it to ashes that were carried away by the wind like smoke. And never again would Arda produce another like. His spirit would never depart from the halls of Mandos. Thus ended the life of the greatest son of the Noldor, who had wrought the most wondrous deeds and the greatest sorrow. No sooner had Fëanor passed than Morgoth sent emissaries to his sons, offering surrender and terms, even promising to return one of the Silmarils. But Medros, Fëanor's eldest son, saw through the deception and convinced his brothers to feign acceptance, agreeing to meet Morgoth's messengers at a chosen place. Yet the Noldor did not trust Morgoth, nor did he trust them. Both sides arrived with more warriors than agreed, but Morgoth's forces far outnumbered them, and he had Balrogs at his command. In the ambush, Medros was captured, his followers slain, and he was taken alive to Angband. His brothers were forced to retreat to Hithlum. But hope dawned anew when Fingolfin's host arrived in Middle-earth and entered Hithlum. At that moment, for the first time, the sun rose, after the Valar had created the sun and the moon. To heal the division among the Noldor, Fingon, the son of Fingolfin, undertook the daring rescue of Medrawus, who had been imprisoned upon the precipices of Thangorodrim. Through this act, the rift among the Noldor was soothed, and Medros relinquished his claim to kingship, yielding it to Fingolfin. Yet his brothers were not pleased with this, though they spoke no word against it. In the following centuries, the Noldor established many kingdoms in Beleriand in the north of Middle-earth. They allied with the Sindar, the grey elves of Beleriand, and also received assistance from the dwarven tribes and the houses of men. But despite their valiant and courageous battles, they could not defeat Morgoth, and their kingdoms were gradually destroyed. Even Fingolfin himself perished under the mighty hammer-grond of Morgoth. However, their tragedy was not yet complete. When Beren, a man of the first house of the Edain, fell in love with Luthien, the daughter of King Elwë and the Myamelian, Elwë demanded that Beren retrieve a Silmaril as a bride price. This perilous and fateful quest led to the death of Finrod, the eldest son of Finarfin and king of Nargothrond. Beren himself also perished under the claws of the wolves of Angband. However, the Silmaril was reclaimed thanks to their bravery and Luthien's unwavering effort. And though he had died, Beren's soul lingered in the halls of Mandos, unwilling to depart the world until Luthien came to bid him farewell on the distant shores of the Outer Sea, from which none who pass ever return. But Luthien's spirit sank into darkness, and at last it departed, leaving behind her body like a flower suddenly severed, lying upon the grass, unfading for a time. Then, in the winter, Luthien came to the halls of Mandos, the destined place of the elves, beyond the mansions of the west at the boundaries of the world. There, many sat in the shadows of their thought, but her beauty shone the brightest, with sorrow deeper than all others. And she knelt before Mandos and sang to him. The song of Luthien before Mandos was the most beautiful ever woven into words, and also the most sorrowful that the world would ever hear. Eternal and imperishable, it is still sung beyond the hearing of the world, and the Valar grieved upon listening to it. For Luthien interwove two themes, the sorrow of the elder and the suffering of men, the two kindreds whom Iluvatar had created to dwell upon Arda. And as she knelt before him, her tears fell like raindrops upon stone, and Mandos was moved to pity as never before, and never again thereafter. Thus he summoned Beren, and as she had spoken in the hour of death, they met once more beyond the Western Sea. But Mandos had no power to withhold the souls of men who had fulfilled their fate, nor could he alter the doom of the children of Iluvatar. So he went before Manwë, the lord of the Valar, who governs the world under Iluvatar's hand. And Manwë sought counsel in the deepest thoughts, where the will of Iluvatar was revealed. These were the choices granted to Luthien. Because of her labors and sufferings, she was given the right to depart Mandos and dwell in Valmar with the Valar until the end of days, forgetting all griefs of her past life. But Beren could not come with her, for the Valar could not take death away from him. It was Iluvatar's gift to men. The other choice was that she could return to Middle-earth, bringing Beren back with her, to live together once more. But no mortal could foretell what their life would hold, and she would become mortal herself, to suffer a second death like him. And long before she departed the world forever, her beauty would be but a memory in song. She chose this fate, forsaking the blessed realm and severing herself from her kin. Thus, whatever sorrow lay ahead, the fates of Beren and Luthien became entwined, and together they passed beyond the bounds of the world. Among the Eldar, only she truly died and left the world long ago. But in her choice, both kindreds were united, and though the world has changed, the Eldar have never again seen one so fair as Luthien, whom they lost forever. The Silmaril now belonged to Elwë, and he entrusted the dwarves with setting it into the exquisite necklace Noglamir. But once the work was complete, greed arose within the dwarves, and they claimed the jewel as their own. Elwë refused, speaking with arrogance, and was slain by the dwarves then and there. However, only 2 of them escaped from Doriath, failing to seize the Silmaril. Yet those 2 twisted the truth, inciting a tragedy between the elves and the dwarves, as armies from the Blue Mountains attacked and destroyed the kingdom of Doriath. Dior, son of Beren and Luthien, tried to rebuild Doriath, but achieved little. After the deaths of Beren and Luthien, he became the keeper of the Silmaril. The sons of Fëanor demanded he surrender it, but he refused, leading to another war that brought the final destruction of Doriath. Dior was slain, but his daughter Elwing escaped to the Sindarin kingdom. There, they harbored the survivors of Gondolin, the realm of Turgon, son of Fingolfin, after its downfall at Morgoth's hand. Among these refugees was Erendil, who later married Elwing and embarked on a great voyage to Valinor, pleading for the Valar's forgiveness on behalf of both elves and men. Erendil was the father of Elros and Elrond. Elros chose mortality and became Tar Miniature, the first king of the mighty realm of Númenor. Elrond chose the fate of the elves and became a great lord of Imladris, witnessing all the tragic yet glorious events of Middle-earth in the ages to come. As told in the War of Wrath, the Valar gathered the greatest army ever assembled, never to be matched again. They defeated Morgoth, cast him out of the world, and reclaimed the remaining 2 Silmarils. But the last 2 sons of Fëanor, Medros and Maglor, stole the jewels, though they could not keep them, for their right to them was lost. One Silmaril burned Medros' hands with unbearable agony. In despair and torment, he cast himself into a fiery chasm, perishing as the Silmaril was swallowed by the earth. Unable to endure its torment, Maglor threw his Silmaril into the sea. Ever after, he wandered the shores, singing in pain and regret as the waves crashed upon the land. Maglor had once been among the greatest minstrels of old, but he never returned to the elves again. Thus, the Silmarils found their eternal resting places. One soared through the heavens, set upon Erendil's ship. One lay within the fire at the heart of the world. One rested in the depths of the sea. These events marked the end of the First Age, the Elder Days. Most surviving elves of Beleriand sailed to Aman, but some remained with Gil-galad, son of Fingon, who established a new kingdom in the remnants of Beleriand. The Elder in Aman befriended the Dundane of Númenor, and for many centuries the 2 races lived in peace and harmony. However, As the Dúnedain gradually fell into darkness due to Sauron's corruption, the elves were eventually forbidden from setting foot in Númenor. In the end, they ceased traveling there altogether but sent Amandil, one of the Dúnedain who had not been swayed by Sauron, a final gift: the 7 Palantiri, the Seeing Stones. In Middle-earth, Gil-galad continued his struggle against Sauron, but the strength of the Eldar was waning, and they could not oppose Morgoth's servant alone. They received aid from Númenor during the War of the Elves and Sauron, which broke out when Sauron failed in his attempt to dominate the elves through the Rings of Power. Even after Sauron was captured and taken to Númenor, Gil-galad could not restore the might of the Eldar in Middle-earth, for too many had perished in the war, and many more continued to sail westward across the sea. After Númenor's downfall, Gil-galad befriended Elendil, the son of Amandil and leader of the exiled Dúnedain. In Middle-earth, Elendil established the twin kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor. When Sauron returned, Gil-galad and Elendil formed the last alliance of elves and men. Together, they overthrew Sauron, though both fell in the final battle, and their victory was incomplete. For Isildur, Elendil's son, seized the One Ring containing much of Sauron's soul and power without destroying. This event marked the end of the Second Age. In the Third Age, the number of the Eldar dwindled further. Their role in the world was gradually overtaken by men. No elven king remained in Middle-earth, yet the most powerful elven lords remained, using the 3 rings to preserve their realm. But when Sauron was finally overthrown and the One Ring was destroyed, the power of the 3 also faded, and most of the Eldar sailed across the sea, returning to Aman. Here are some details about the dwarves and men. The Nolgrim, or as they called themselves, the Khazad, were known to men as the dwarves. They were not the children of Ilúvatar, but were created by Olli the Smith before the awakening of the elves. However, since Ilúvatar did not permit any beings to awaken before the elves, he allowed the fathers of the dwarves to remain, but decreed that they would not awaken until after the elves. At first, there were only 13 dwarves, the 7 fathers of the dwarves and 6 wives. Durin, the eldest, had no wife at first, and lived alone for a long time, while his brethren established their clan. But eventually, from one of those clans, Durin found a wife, and founded a great kingdom known as Khazad-dûm-dûm. Though there were originally only 7 dwarven clans, an 8th group later emerged, consisting of exiles from the original 7, who settled in Beleriand. Initially, the Sindar hunted them, but when they realized that the dwarves were not evil creatures, they allowed them to live in peace. The dwarves lived throughout Middle-earth, trading among themselves and with other races, such as the elves and men. They possessed deep knowledge of smithcraft, armor, and weaponry. It was they who taught these skills to the Sindar of Beleriand, and at least 2 dwarven clans fought alongside the elves against Morgoth. In the Second Age, many dwarves lived in Khazad-dûm, making it a shared kingdom for various dwarven clans. The line of Durin became the most powerful and revered among them, and they allied with the Eldar against Sauron. However, it is believed that the dwarves of the eastern lands fell into darkness and may have even served Sauron. The Third Age saw the decline of the dwarves, although they continued to prosper and multiply in Khazad-dûm. Yet their greed for gold led them to dig too deep, awakening a Balrog that had survived from the Elder Days. This Balrog devastated Khazad-dûm, forcing the dwarves into exile. Though Durin's line survived and established new kingdoms, they longed to reclaim their ancestral homeland. Legends tell that one day in the Fourth Age, the dwarves will reclaim Khazad-dûm, though it will be the twilight of their race, as their numbers will have dwindled too greatly. Men known to the Eldar as the Atani were the second children of Ilúvatar. They were also called Hildor, the followers, and had many other names: Apanuna, the afterborn, Engwa, the sickly, and Firima, the mortal. The elves also referred to men as the usurpers, the strangers, the inscrutable, the self-cursed, the heavy-handed, the fearful of the night, and the children of the sun. Few tales of men were recorded in the Elder Days. They did not receive the direct guidance of the Valar as the elves did, and they feared the powers rather than loved them. Men did not understand the purpose of the Valar, and they often opposed them, struggling against the world itself. Compared to the elves, men are weaker, more easily slain by weapons or misfortune, and harder to heal. They suffer from sickness and disease, grow old, and eventually die. What happens to their souls afterward remains unknown to the elves. Some say they go to the halls of Mandos, but their waiting place is not meant for the elves. Their fate is under the authority of Iluvatar alone. And aside from Manwë, only Mandos knows where they will go after their time of reflection in the silent halls beside the outer sea. No one has ever returned from death, except for Beren, son of Barahir, who once touched a Silmaril. However, he never again made contact with the race of men. It is possible that the fate of men after death does not lie within the hands of the Valar, and was never foretold in the music of the Ainur. Men fought in the wars of Beleriand during the Elder Days on both sides. In the Second Age, many tribes served Sauron, while the Edain allied with the Eldar. Their role only truly became dominant in the Third Age. The great wars and mighty kingdoms of that era belonged mostly to men, rather than to elves or dwarves. Though Middle-earth endured a long dark age under Sauron's dominion, the exiled Dúnedain gradually restored the glory of men. They achieved many great deeds and were the ones who ultimately brought an end to Sauron and the dark power of Mordor at the close of the Third Age. The Fourth Age would be called the Age of Men, for the other races of Middle-earth would fade. Men would become the dominant race in Middle-earth, and what would happen in the ages that followed, no one could say.